This week, we're going to talk about outdoor enclosures, the different types, ratings, and everything you need to know. Make sure you stay tuned. Welcome to the show where we tackle the tough questions submitted by installers, estimators, project managers, IT personnel, and anybody in the ICT community. We are connecting at the human level so that we can connect the world. If you're watching this show on YouTube, would you mind hitting the subscribe button and the bell button to be notified when new content is being produced? If you happen to be listening to us on one of the audio podcast platforms, leave us a 5-star rating. And if it's not worthy of a 5-star rating, shoot me an email. Let me know what I need to do to make it a 5-star rating. Those couple little simple steps helps us take on the algorithm so we can get this message out to more people in the ICT industry so we can educate, encourage, and enrich the lives of more people in this industry. Thursday nights, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. What are you doing? We do a live stream on TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, you name it. We're all over the place. But Chuck, I'm driving my truck home. I can't be watching a video. They are recorded and you can watch them at your convenience. We tackled the questions for installation, certification, estimation, even career advice. Also, while this show is free and will always remain free, would you mind consider being a Patreon member or maybe even going and buying us a cup of coffee? You can do that by scanning the QR code on the screen where you can buy me a cup of coffee, become a Patreon member, or hook up with us on any one of our social media platforms. As I mentioned, outdoor enclosures is something that we got across every once in a while as installers in the ICT industry. I've installed a few, but I would not consider myself an expert. And I had a question come across to me on TikTok where somebody asked me something about static electricity and PVC and outdoor rated enclosures. And that got me to thinking, hey, I know somebody in this realm who I would consider a subject matter expert. So we're bringing on the show Gary Bibeau from Optiview. Gary, how are you doing today, my friend?
Hey, Chuck. Thanks for having me on. I'm doing great.
Pleasure to have you, man. Now, Gary and I, we do a lot of work on Low Voltage Nation, so we know each other pretty well. So this is just going to be a conversation between two old guys talking about outdoor enclosures.
Right? That sounds good.
There you go. So, Gary, for those people who don't have the pleasure of knowing you, give us the 30-second, who is Gary and what is Optiview?
Sure. So, Chuck, I was lucky enough to come into the industry at a younger age. I've been with Optiview just over 20 years now. I am the director of sales for Optiview. But about 7 or 8 years ago, we saw a need to get into the enclosure space. And Optiview created another brand called ArmorLogix. And I am now the director of sales for both Optiview and ArmorLogix. With Optiview, we build out a lot of camera surveillance and wireless long-range solutions, fiber solutions using the ArmorLogix enclosure. But we also cater to an entire market of contractors out in the field that use our enclosures for all sorts of projects.
That's a great explanation. So what exactly is an outdoor enclosure, and give us a couple maybe applications on maybe some things people would use it for?
Sure. So we primarily focus on 5052 marine grade aluminum enclosures, but we didn't always use aluminum enclosures. Many years ago, Optiview started with PVC plastic enclosures. We then upgraded to fiberglass enclosures. We then moved to steel enclosures, and ultimately we've settled on aluminum enclosures. Our enclosures are available in NEMA 3 and NEMA 4, and we have clients that use them for both indoor and outdoor use. And for equipment going inside of them, we see network hardware, we see fiber hardware, we see camera surveillance recorders, and then we do some real fun custom projects with some clients that have created or invented their own technology that is indoor rated, and we help them bring it outdoors.
Yeah, I remember looking at your cabinets when I came to that low voltage meetup. I don't know, it was 3, 4, 5, a year, 2, 5 years ago. I don't know. The days are all blurring together as you get
Right.
older. And I tell you, they are beautiful. They're gorgeous.
I
So
appreciate
you
it.
so you've sold so you sold PVC and the fiberglass and the metal, right?
We did.
Um, I know I asked you this on our pre-show thing, and I wonder if you've had time to think about it. I had an audience member ask me about static electricity in PVC. Have you had time to think about that, or maybe come to a conclusion about it causing problems with equipment inside of it?
So, typically we mount our equipment to a backplate that's included with the enclosure, and that is an aluminum backplate. There's been some talk that people have asked for other types of backplates that are non-conductive, but in the pre-show, you and I talked that even wood can be conductive. So it's best to kind of look at your manufacturer and see what they recommend and see if they have any policies on how the equipment should be installed properly.
Now, do you sell nationwide, worldwide, or what?
So that's a great question. Armor Logics has been primarily nationwide through a network of dealers and integrators. And in the past 2 years, we've gone global. So we have enclosures now being sent over to Europe, Australia, and Japan.
Nice. And the reason I ask that is because even if you just look at just the U.S., and I know there's
Right.
people who listen to my show from around the globe, but they may not realize it's about the U.S. We have a wide range of climatic environments, right?
That's
In
right.
Florida, you've got humidity, you got the sun baking down on stuff, which can actually make PVC brittle and break.
Right.
You get up into to like North Dakota,
Mhm.
Minnesota, you got freezing temperatures. That's a pretty wide range of use for stuff to be in. So, how do you guys address that wide range of operating range that your closures might be exposed to?
Sure. So I'll tell you that with Optiview being a national provider of equipment, we ran into those issues firsthand. And that is ultimately how we ended up with the aluminum enclosures. And it's exactly why we offer them in both NEMA 3 and NEMA 4 to match the person's environment or to better protect the equipment that's going to be mounted inside.
Do you find the aluminum enclosures are they better at dissipating the heat than a PVC or a fiberglass type of enclosure?
Sure, without a doubt. On a lot of your plastic, PVC, fiberglass enclosures, they're completely sealed. Where the aluminum enclosures, we've got louvers on the front door and also on the sides of the enclosure. But aluminum is also lighter than steel, while it also dissipates heat better than steel.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. Now, you said you just mentioned you had vents, and that got me to thinking. Some equipment generates a lot of heat,
That's
right?
right.
And there's a rule in the electronics rule called the half-life rule. The half-life rule says for every 10 degrees above ambient temperature that a piece of equipment gets exposed to, the life expectancy of that equipment gets reduced by half.
That's
I,
right. And Chuck, a lot of people don't know about that half-life rule. So that's something that you can reach out to, you could reach out to your equipment manufacturer and explain to them the parameters that they may be installing that equipment into, and they may be able to help you better navigate the warranty process. Or if you're going to sign service agreements on that equipment, you want to know all of the facts before you're signing a service agreement on equipment that you don't understand the warranty of.
yeah, and so that gets me diving a little deeper there. So you said you have vents.
That's right.
Couple of thoughts here. One, the opening in the vents might not be enough. So is there another way we can dissipate the heat? And number two, especially here in Florida, we got bugs.
That's right. So the first editions of the Armor Logics enclosures came with louvers on the sides and on the front door. We saw many customers requesting fans, so we do have thermostatically controlled fans. And down here in Florida, we definitely have a problem with bugs. Many of our enclosures now have screened or mesh behind those vents. And a lot of times, the people creating the bid spec or doing the engineering drawings will take into account what kind of environment or nuisances are going to be going up against this enclosure. And they may specifically call out a diameter or a screen size needed to protect that vent from anything getting into it.
You know, this is the farmer in me talking now, because you know I live in Central Florida and we have a homestead, and we've got ducks and geese and chickens and goats and all kinds of animals and stuff. And
Right.
when you have animals, you have feed. When you have feed, you have mice. Well, mice, I have these feed barrels that have screw-on tops. They chew through those things all the time. So
Right.
I'd imagine they could chew through a PVC box or a fiberglass box, but I bet you probably don't have too many chewing through aluminum, do you?
They're not going to have very good teeth if they're trying to chew through these boxes here.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things that we found on the other enclosures that we sold in the past, being the plastic and fiberglass, is they actually we weren't always necessarily concerned about them breaking down over time. It was the contractor breaking them during the install. So they're transporting the box to a job site, they set it down, and they break a tab off. Or on the fiberglass boxes, they set it down too hard on concrete, and you chip away that little bit of fiberglass where those strands start to come out, and over time it's going to continue to peel away. The other thing that comes up a lot is of course mice down here, or maybe you've got New York mice, but vandals. So we're not only looking to keep your rodents out or looking to keep animals out, but we're looking to keep people out and keep that equipment safe inside.
So yeah, PVC and fiberglass we can be relatively easy to break into. What
That's
kind
right.
of security do you have on the aluminum ones that makes the protection better than the alternatives?
Yeah, so, coming from the field, one of the things we wanted to do with the Armor Logix enclosure is not have a whole SKU list of add-ons that our dealer, integrator, or customer had to navigate through. So the enclosure is going to come with several things right out of the box, ready to go in the field. First thing is a welded-on heat shade or sun shield at the top, and that's going to help better dissipate heat. You'll also see that all of our enclosures come with insulation inside. They're going to come with the equipment backplate because we know you're going to be mounting equipment inside. They come with a universal mounting bracket that's also aluminum that allows you to mount it to a wall or a pole or even to unistrut. But most importantly, you've got to keep your equipment secure. And we give you a cam lock with every enclosure. If for some reason you wanted to upgrade from a cam lock or you wanted to use a padlock with a shared key for multiple integrators or multiple contractors, we do have these padlockable units. So this is one of the biggest upgrades that we send out with the enclosure today.
So aluminum's metal. Do you have to bond it to a ground? And if you do, how do you bond aluminum to a ground?
So one of the biggest things we really have to go back to is following your local code. And we typically advise that you use a licensed professional if you're not sure. We do have aluminum grounding lugs here, and it is something that could be added on with the enclosure. Typically, though, what we see is the contractor is figuring that out on their own in the field and properly installing the project to local code.
Gotcha. So what you're saying is hire a professional electrician.
Always.
Yes. That's always good advice when it comes to doing bonding and grounding. Oh, we never did answer it. We kind of skirted my other question earlier.
Sure.
So we talked about the vents and and getting in. Is there do you guys sell some kind of a fan kit or fan motor kit that's something that might need a bigger air exchange?
We do. So every now and then we get customers who ask if we could put air conditioners on these units. And the short answer is yes, we do have air conditioners that you could add on to the units. But what we've seen in the market and with the amount of equipment that we're putting out in the field, a fan usually suffices and gets the job done. We use a thermostatically controlled fan that you see here. This model here is 12 volt, and it has a built-in thermostat right here. So as the temperatures ramp up within the enclosure, this fan will also ramp up speed. If you're a low voltage tech, these are available in 12 to 24 volts. If you've got a site that you want to run 110 volt fans, we do have 110 volt fans. But as much as we talk about cooling the box, we also have areas throughout the nation and now throughout the world that say, how do I keep the equipment warm enough? And we offer heaters.
Oh, that's cool.
So this is a safe to touch heater. The original generation of these had an exposed coil, and we were concerned about techs or people who are untrained inside the box touching them. So this unit here does have a protective cover.
So heat can transfer through conductance, and there's two other ways. I can't think of on top of my head, but conductance, where you have two pieces of metal touching each other. So is the mounting on that plastic or is it metal?
So the mounting on that housing is plastic. And the way you would mount that inside the enclosure is on a piece of DIN rail.
Oh, okay.
So on the back of that heater, there's a clip system that will hook onto your standard DIN rail. And what we've done to make it easier in the field is actually offer 3-inch and 4-inch and 12-inch pieces of DIN rail. So when you or your guys are out in the field, you're not having to run back to your hardware store and find the necessary parts. We could really offer all of those pieces and parts turnkey to be ready to go out in the field.
Let me ask you a question. How many of those heaters have you sold in Florida?
Very, very few.
Because it doesn't get freezing in Florida. Well, technically it does for 2 days.
Yeah, you got to
out of
be
the
careful,
year.
Chuck, because we're up here in Jacksonville and people like to joke that we're Southern Georgia. So we get a few
Technically,
mornings.
you are Southern Georgia.
Right. We do get a few mornings that gets cold, but typically the question from our customers here in the southern states is how do we cool it down, not heat it up?
Gotcha. So you mentioned the NEMA rating several times. What are the most common ratings that you find out that are out there? And what exactly are the ratings and how does somebody know which one to pick?
Sure. So a lot of this has to start with design planning of your project and knowing exactly what equipment you're going to put inside the enclosure. If you're putting in a piece of equipment that's going to have a lot of heat and it has to vent that heat somewhere, typically you're going to lean towards a NEMA 3 enclosure, and NEMA 3 is going to mean it's vented. Those vents can be on the side, they could be on the bottom of the enclosure, or in ArmorLogic's case, when we do a NEMA 3 enclosure, the vents are on the side and on the door. Our thought process is we're pulling in cooler air from the side vents down bottom while exhausting the hotter air from the front center of the door or the top vent of the door. When you have equipment that you're not necessarily worried about heat dissipation or cooling down the inside of the enclosure, but you want a little more cleanliness inside the enclosure or less humidity inside the enclosure, you're going to lean towards a NEMA 4 enclosure, and that is no vents, not anywhere on the enclosure. We had a conversation with somebody just a few months ago, and he said, I wish they made a NEMA 4 vent. And I chuckled at that, and come to find out there is a such thing as a NEMA 4 vent. And what it does, it uses a series of baffles on the inside of that fan unit to not allow any of the moisture to enter in or get to the inside of the enclosure. We have not seen a need to actually offer those, but it's important for people to know what is available to them out in the market, whether it's through ArmorLogic's or other supply houses.
Would keeping a piece of equipment cooler be more difficult in a NEMA 4 as opposed to the NEMA 3?
Yeah, so the aluminum is going to dissipate heat, but when you're actually moving air through the enclosure and you're putting the fan on it, you're not building that heat up throughout the day. So having a fan running and actually getting that fan to kick on at a lower temp to start getting the heat out of the box sooner is a better situation. And heat's a big deal. You know, down here in Florida, people put in a network switch. It runs fine during the install. It's going to run fine throughout the morning, but towards that 3, 4, 5 o'clock hour when it's at its hottest, that's typically where you're going to see those failures. So whenever we're putting gear inside of a box that is taking power or has internal fans for itself, we're going to recommend that you go with a NEMA 3 enclosure and also add the fan and thermostat to that enclosure as well.
Gotcha. So I see 3 of them behind you. Are those the sizes they come in? I guess small, medium, and large, I guess, maybe?
Yeah. So if we did just 3 sizes, my job would be a lot easier, Chuck. We've got a full list of sizes here, and just recently we've created some smaller sizes actually. So let's just start from the smallest and go up from that so everybody knows what's available. And keep in mind, if you're looking at other vendors or you're looking at other material, maybe like plastic or fiberglass, you're going to find another variation of sizes. But for us, we base these sizes on what we've seen in the field and what our customers are asking for. So the newest, smallest size is a 12-inch by 12-inch by 6-inch deep. And that was created from one of our main sizes, which was 12 inches by 12 inches by 11 inches. So what we heard from a lot of guys putting in a little 4-port network switch is they didn't need all of that depth. So we then looked at the network switches they were using, how much space they would need between the back plate, the switch, and the fan that's mounted on the front door. And that's how the 12-12-6 was born. Next, you go to a 16-inch by 16-inch by 6, and that's the little brother to the 16 by 16 by 10. So again, if you're looking to have that fan in there and you're looking to use a slimmer switch or a piece of hardware, the 16-16-6 gives a lot of guys all the room they need, where if you're looking to add additional equipment, we're going to recommend the 16-16-10. The 19-19-12 is probably one of my most popular sizes, and that is what you see just over my shoulder here. This really is the size that gives the integrator out in the field enough room to work with, not being overly obtrusive on a pole or on a wall, but it allows you to fit DVR or NVR inside. It's going to allow you to fit almost all of your network switch sizes inside. If you're looking to mount not only DIN rail and unistrut inside, there's typically enough room within this size to mount the equipment and have additional space to play with out there on the job site. Up from the 19-inch size, we go to a taller size, which is 27 inches tall by 22 inches wide by 13 inches deep. And where we see this used a lot is guys who are wanting to hang their rack mountable devices. So we've got customers that have brought outside complete server solutions inside of an enclosure. We got guys who are hanging rack mountable network switches and bringing in other infrastructures, not only copper, but also fiber or even cellular connectivity. And then you get into one of our last sizes that's readily available here, which is, we kind of joke that it's our refrigerator, which is 20 inches by 22 by 22. And that unit doesn't come with a back plate, but it actually comes with an adjustable and removable shelving system. So if you've got a project where you want to just slide your equipment in and out, the 20 by 22 by 22 is a good size to go with. Just keep in mind, you are going to be pushing yourself further off the pole and out into the environment, where your 27 and other sizes we've talked about really try to hug up against the pole as close as possible.
Gotcha. So making a hole in PVC and fiberglass is relatively easy. Mm-hmm. What's the process for making a hole in one of those aluminum enclosures and keeping it still NEMA 3 rated or NEMA 4 rated?
Yeah, so this is always a fun thing, because I watch integrators go about this in totally different ways. And typically it's all around how many holes do you have to put in the box. Some guys like to use a spacer bit and just use their drill and drill out the holes, of course, after marking them properly. And there's a whole series of grommets or cable glands that are available from us or through a hardware store. If you're doing a lot of enclosures, you've got guys who invest in a punch out tool. And what you would do then is mark your enclosure where you're wanting to put the hole, and they would use some type of hydraulic punch to punch out that hole. Once you have those connections put on, it's important to think of what infrastructure you're bringing in to make sure you're using the right gland that's not going to leak or allow nuisances to get into that enclosure at a later time.
So do you recommend making those holes in the bottom of the enclosure or the side, or is it just kind of really dictated by the job site?
Yeah, so that's something that we talk a lot about with the integrators, especially when we get pictures submitted to us from the job. It's my preference that you always come from the bottom of the enclosure. That way, if a connection loosens up over time or a technician didn't seal it properly, you're a lot less likely to bring water through that connection point. We cringe a little more when we see guys bringing in connections into the side of the enclosure, but we cringe the most when we see somebody bringing in on the side and at the top, because any water that makes it through that connection is now coming down the entire side of the enclosure. Now, other manufacturers and other pictures that I've seen submitted from other brands, I've seen connection points come through the top. And that's something, one, that we don't recommend. But number two, it's almost impossible to do on the ArmorLogix enclosure because we do have that welded on heat shade on top.
So the welded on heat shade, it's kind of like a sunroof over it, isn't it? It's kind of.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Our thought process behind the heat shade was much like a heat sink over a processor. So we wanted to give a gap for airflow to move through. And at the same time, you know, being down here in Florida and being in the southern states, we wanted to block some of that sun. So this sunshade does a few things for us. It's going to block some of the sun. It's going to give us better dissipation of heat because of that airflow through there. And the other thing is you've got a drip edge that brings that water out past the front door.
Oh, that's cool. I like that.
That's right.
So on average, these aluminum closures probably have to weigh more than the PVC and the fiberglass ones, right?
Yeah, they do. And the good news is, though, they're lighter than steel. So you get the added benefits of having a metallic enclosure while not having to deal with the weight of the steel or having to worry about ceramic coating or painting the steel to try to dissipate some of that heat.
And rust.
Yeah, rust is a big thing. And actually, Chuck, I'm glad you brought that up because ArmorLogix is constantly involved in case studies. We work with a lot of customers who question how this enclosure is going to measure up or compare to an enclosure that they're already used to. And that's usually how ArmorLogix gets started with a customer is on these larger projects is with a case study. So they purchase the first enclosure. It goes out mounted side by side in the environment up against their plastic, PVC, fiberglass, or steel enclosure. And usually we get 3, 6, 9, and 12-month benchmarks. Typically at that 1 year mark, you're going to see a breakdown in all of the other enclosures where with the 5052 aluminum, they look almost like new and they're typically still shining out there on the job site.
You know, I do have a homestead in Central Florida. So if you ever need a study done, I got 3 acres. I can put some out there and I can have the direct sunlight beating on them. And I can give you a good report on which is better.
Yeah, I'll say this. I look forward to doing something with you. You'll get a deep discount or maybe we could work something out for you on the side.
There you go. Although I don't have any electronics outside. So, you know, that's the bad thing about having a farm. It's just the animals out there. So it is a little bit heavier, but I think by choosing to use an aluminum enclosure, besides the benefits, because most customers, they hear the benefits but they don't pay. It's going to boil down to cost, and I know the aluminum comes cost more. But as an integrator, that's just got to set you apart from somebody who's putting in one of them cheap one that's going to last maybe 2 years. Right? I mean, this is going to be around for a long time. I mean, we'll have zombies walking around eating brains,
right?
And your enclosures will still be out there.
So, you know, one of the things we cover in some of our training content is asking that integrator, how are they going to be responsible to upkeep that site in the future? So what we use the term is total cost of ownership. So if you're going with a cheaper enclosure and you're putting expensive equipment inside of a cheap enclosure, are you willing to risk the breakdown of that equipment? If your responsibility ends at the time that you seal the box and walk off or ride off into the sunset, then really nobody cares except the end user, but by then it's too late. Now, if you're an integrator that's going to sign a service agreement, or you're going to be on the hook for longer extended warranties, 3, 4, 5-year warranties, I would strongly advise you to look at your total cost of ownership, not just the enclosure price itself.
Yeah, let's talk about life expectancy, right? I've got a NID on the side of my house. If you actually watch my TikTok videos, I made a funny TikTok video out of it where as a service tech calling the operator at the call center, and she's too busy playing a game, not answering, because I've ran it a lot of times as a service tech, right? Well, when you actually look at that, NID's been there for, I don't know, 15, 20 years. That thing, it's got a wasp nest inside of it, and it's all breaking down, falling apart. So when you say total cost of ownership, right, if you put in a similarly sized fiberglass or similarly sized PVC box compared to one of the aluminum ones that you were talking about,
right?
Yeah, the aluminum is going to cost more, but it's going to, what's the life expectancy of aluminum, right? That thing will be there, what, 2 decades, 3 decades?
Well, at least that from what we're seeing now, we've got enclosures that are out there pushing 9 years, and we're still using the original door seals. We're still using the original backplate. The sunshade's still in place, and having the metallic brackets, everything's still there. We actually start questioning the infrastructure that the enclosure is mounted to. And one of the things we shared some time back is we did a neighborhood that we mounted an enclosure on the back of the HOA wall. So on the back of this brick wall, it had sprinkler controllers, it had R-Box, it had some other controller hardware on the back. And one morning, a garbage truck pulled in there too quick and crashed through the brick wall. The brick wall did not survive, but our Armor Logix enclosure did. That same enclosure went up on the new brick wall once it was installed.
That's cool. For those who may not know, RBOC is an acronym for Regional Bell Operating Company. There's the acronym person talking to you, right? So let's talk about some mounting options, right? Can you mount these to? You mentioned mount it to a wall. How would you mount it to a wall? How could you mount this to a pole? And I think I remember right when we came up for the low voltage thing, didn't you have some kind of a square mounting stand thing that you had one mounted on?
Yeah. So, typically we've got to give the integrator a bracket that's going to meet many different infrastructure installation parameters out there. So we've worked on a bracket to fit a few things here. First thing our bracket does is pushes the enclosure off of the existing infrastructure that you're mounting to. This is going to give you even more heat dissipation and better airflow around the enclosure. The next thing is we know a lot of guys want to mount enclosures to a wall. So, of course, we put mounting holes on the bracket for you to mount it directly to a wall. Other guys come and say, we want to mount this to a post or a pole. And our universal bracket will allow you to mount it to a pole using bands or straps. Last up we've got is a lot of guys who say, hey, we run in a unistrut out there in the field. Can we use the bracket on unistrut? And mounting these enclosures to unistrut, you're going to use the same wall mount holes that you actually see on the bracket.
So it sounds like you have lots of options, because that'd be my biggest concern, because these things are, you mentioned all the different sizes. I can see that being a challenge, especially with aluminum, So I'm glad to hear that you have those kinds of options. Any final parting words of wisdom?
Any final parting words of wisdom? I would say strongly consider total cost of ownership, because that's the biggest conversation we have here on a day-by-day basis. And coming from somebody who's used all of the enclosures, being plastic, fiberglass, aluminum, and steel, I'm a bit biased because we do offer aluminum, but we've had options to offer other enclosure types again and again, and we continue to stick with the aluminum.
Gotcha. Gary, it's a pleasure having you on the show, my friend.
Chuck, thanks a lot for having me.
My pleasure. So I hope that you learned something new from Outdoor Enclosures this week, because there's more options than the PVC and the fiberglass. Till next time, everybody, remember, knowledge is power.
That's it for this episode of today's podcast. We hope you were able to learn something. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future content. Also, leave a rating so we can help even more people learn about telecommunications. Until next time, be safe.